The Whispering Shadows. In the forgotten town of Ravenswood, nestled deep within a forest shrouded in perpetual twilight, stood an ancient mansion with a dark history. Locals spoke in hushed tones of a lost soul that roamed its shadowy halls, trapped in a liminal space between life and death. On a moonless night, three curious souls ventured into the heart of the forest. Drawn by the haunting allure of the mansion, the air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled in their hearts. Leading the group was Sarah, a skeptic with an unwavering belief in the tangible. "Ghosts are but tales, my friends. There's nothing to fear," she declared, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her confidence. As they entered, the floorboards groaned beneath their weight. Desks hung in the air, and the walls seemed to close in, whispering secrets only the spirits knew. A sudden chill swept through the corridor, followed by a mournful sigh that echoed through the empty halls. Sarah forced a laugh. Just the wind, nothing more. In the pale light, they glimpsed a figure, draped in tattered rags, its features obscured by darkness. It stood at the end of the hall, a presence of palpable sorrow. The lost soul seemed bound by an invisible chain, condemned to wander eternally. The second, a historian named Mark, took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you? What binds you here?" The figure remained silent, its form pulsating with an otherworldly energy. From the depths of the mansion, a mournful melody echoed, as if the very walls mourned the lost soul's fate. They followed the haunting notes, winding through the maze-like corridors. Each room held fragments of the soul's existence, faded portraits, dusty books, and forgotten trinkets. In an attic filled with forgotten relics, they discovered a journal, its pages filled with melancholic prose. The writer spoke of unfulfilled promises, of love forsaken, and dreams left to wither. It was the lament of a soul unable to find peace. As they read, the room grew colder, and the figure materialized before them. Its hollow eyes bore into their souls, imploring them to understand. Eyes wide with determination, Mark whispered, "We'll help you find your way." In a blinding surge of light, the figure seemed to flicker, as if tasting the promise of release. Encouraged, they ventured to the heart of the mansion, the overgrown garden, where an ancient oak stood sentinel over forgotten graves. With trembling hands, they began to unearth the past, uncovering the secrets that bound the lost soul to Ravenswood Mansion. The figure watched, its ethereal presence tingling with hope. At last, as the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, the final piece fell into place. The lost soul turned to them, a glimmer of gratitude in its eyes. Before fading into the morning mist, Ravenswood Mansion stood in solemn stillness, the whispers of the past finally at rest. The tale of the lost soul would be etched in the annals of Ravenswood, a testament to the power of compassion, and the belief that even the most tormented souls can find solace in the arms of understanding hearts.
The Haunting of Harvest Hollow. Once, in the heart of Harvest Hollow, nestled amidst a sea of golden fields, stood a scarecrow named Jasper. He stood tall and stoic, his tattered clothes flapping in the wind, and his button eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Jasper had guarded the fields for decades, watching over the crops as the seasons passed. His company only the rustling leaves and the cawing of distant crows. Loneliness gnawed at Jasper's straw-filled chest, for he longed for more than the endless sway of the wheat. He yearned for laughter, for the warmth of a companion's touch. But the villagers, they were afraid of him. They whispered tales of his haunted gaze, of his uncanny ability to know the secrets they dared not speak aloud. One chilling autumn night, as the moon cast an eerie glow over the fields, a stranger arrived in the hollow. The stranger, a weary traveler, had heard the stories of the haunted scarecrow but was undeterred. With a determined step, he approached Jasper. "Lonely night, isn't it?" the traveler remarked, his voice echoing in the empty expanse. Jasper, surprised and elated, nodded silently, his button eyes gleaming. The traveler introduced himself as Samuel, and shared tales of distant lands and forgotten adventures. As the night wore on, the two forged an unlikely friendship. Samuel's laughter filled the air, a sound Jasper hadn't heard in an eternity. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between Jasper and Samuel deepened, the Scarecrow's desolation began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and joy. But the villagers grew suspicious. They watched from a distance, their eyes narrowing with each passing day. Whispers spread like wildfire through the autumn breeze. Rumors of the natural alliance between man and straw. One fateful night, as the harvest moon hung low, a mob gathered at the edge of the field. Torches flickered, casting long, menacing shadows. Their faces contorted with fear and anger, they advanced towards Jasper and Samuel. Samuel, standing tall beside his friend, faced the approaching mob. "He's no threat to you," he pleaded, his voice a desperate plea. But the villagers would not listen. In their eyes, fear had taken root, and nothing could sway them. With a gut-wrenching cry, they set the field ablaze, consuming the wheat, the Scarecrow, and Samuel, as the flames consumed him. Jasper's button eyes glowed with an ethereal light, a final testament to the bond they had shared. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the fire consumed all, leaving only ashes in its wake. From that day forward, the fields of Harvest Hollow remained barren, a haunting reminder of the price of fear. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the empty expanse, some claimed to hear the distant laughter of a long-forgotten Scarecrow and his brave friend, forever lost to the flames. And so, the legend of Jasper, the lonely Scarecrow, lived on. A cautionary tale of the darkness that fear can bring, and the light that true friendship can offer, even in the most unlikely of places. Frost's Fury. In a small, isolated village nestled in a valley, winter reigned supreme, snow piled high, blanketing everything in a cold and forgiving embrace. Children laughed and played, building snowmen in the crisp, white fields. But this winter was different. One icy eve, as the moon hung low, a bitter wind swept through the village. The snowmen, standing sentinel in the yards, seemed to shiver and tremble, their cold stone eyes gleaming with an unsettling, otherworldly light. Among them stood Frost, a towering figure, fashioned with care by the skilled hands of the village children. His frozen features seemed to hold secrets, a promise of something darker beneath the surface. As the night grew colder, Frost stirred. A low, guttural growl emanated from deep within, startling the slumbering village. His stone eyes flickered, then gleamed with an unholy fire. Frost, the snowman, had come to life. With a chilling creak, he broke free from his frozen prison, leaving a trail of shattered ice in his wake. The village slept, blissfully unaware of the terror that now roamed among them. Frost moved with eerie grace, his icy limbs silent against the snow-covered ground. He prowled the silent streets, hunting for the warmth of life to extinguish. His heart, if one could call it that, burned with a malevolent desire. The first victim was young Emma, a girl who had helped create Frost with her own hands. She awoke to the sight of the looming snowman, his eyes glowing like fiery coals. With a swift, merciless strike, Frost ended her life, leaving her breathless in the snow. The village awoke to a nightmare. Panic spread like wildfire as the chilling truth took hold. Frost was real, and he hungered for more than just snow. Desperate cries filled the frigid air, but Frost was relentless. He stalked through the village, his snow cloak formed a spectral nightmare against the moonlit landscape. One by one, he claimed the lives of those he encountered. The survivors huddled in their homes, praying for the dawn to break. They could hear Frost's chilling laughter echoing through the streets, a cruel mockery of their feeble attempts to escape. As morning approached, Frost's power waned. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the village in a weak, pale glow. With a final, mournful howl, Frost retreated, his icy form melting back into the snow. The village was forever scarred, its innocence lost to the malevolent force that had been unleashed. Frost's reign of terror was over, but his legend lived on, a haunting reminder of the darkness that could emerge from the purest of intentions. And so, in the depths of winter, when the snow piled high and the wind howled through the valley, the children of the village would whisper cautionary tales of Frost, the snowman who had come to life. A chilling reminder that even the purest snow could hide a heart of darkness. Echoes of the Forgotten. The moon hung low in the ink black sky, casting long, chilling shadows across the old graveyard. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sarah, a curious soul with a penchant for the macabre, found herself standing alone amidst the moss-covered tombstones. Her footsteps echoed eerily, resonating through the quiet burial ground. The night was so silent. It seemed as though even the wind dared not disturb the restless slumber of the departed. As she walked deeper into the cemetery, Sarah's breath quickened. The darkness seemed to seep into her bones, settling like a heavy shroud. As she walked deeper into the cemetery, Sarah's breath quickened. The darkness seemed to seep into her bones, settling like a heavy shroud. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down upon her, a tangible presence that seemed to watch her every move. Then, from the shadows, a sound emerged, faint at first. Like a distant whisper, it grew stronger and more distinct. Cries, mournful and haunting, filled the air. It was as if the very souls interred beneath her feet were reaching out, their anguish seeping through the veil that separated the living from the dead. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She turned, searching for the source of the mournful wails, but the darkness concealed the truth. The cries seemed to come from all directions, surrounding her, enveloping her in a suffocating embrace. Desperation gnawed at her as the voices grew louder, their sorrowful lamentations clawing at her soul. Each cry was a spectral echo, a plea for release from the bonds of eternity. Terror welled up within Sarah, threatening to consume her. She stumbled backwards, her feet tripping over uneven ground. The tombstones seemed to leer at her, their cold stone faces twisted into grotesque grins. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a shadow itself, a wispy form that flickered like a dying flame, its eyes, two hollow voids, fixed on Sarah with a mournful intensity. "Help us," it moaned, its voice a pitiful rasp. "Release us from this torment." Sarah's voice caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of the lost souls pressing against her, their collective sorrow threatening to pull her down into the abyss. With trembling hands, she fumbled in her pocket for a small cross that her grandmother had given her. Clutching it tightly, she closed her eyes and began to recite a prayer, her voice quivering but resolute. The shadowy figure recoiled, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind. The cries grew fainter, fading into the night. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was alone once more. The graveyard was silent, the restless souls quieted, at least for the moment. She turned and fled, her footsteps echoing through the night. The cries of the forgotten souls lingered in her ears, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separated the living from the dead. From that night on, Sarah never returned to the graveyard. The echoes of the forgotten souls would forever haunt her dreams, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beyond the realm of the living. Shadows of laughter. Officer Sarah Mitchell gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white as she raced through the rain-soaked streets. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio, urgency cutting through the static. "Unit 14, respond to a 911 call at 47 Elm Street. Possible homicide." Sarah's heart pounded. Elm Street was a quiet neighborhood, known for its picket fences and well-tended gardens. The rain made it seem even quieter, the patter against the car's roof a haunting rhythm. She arrived at 47 Elm Street, her headlights slicing through the darkness. The scene that greeted her was straight from a nightmare. The house's windows were dark, but the porch light flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across the lawn. With her hand on her holster, Sarah approached the front door. It hung slightly ajar, rain leaking in through the gap. The air was thick with a metallic scent that made her stomach turn. She pushed the door open, her flashlight slicing through the gloom. The sight that met her eyes froze her blood. The living room was a tableau of horror. A family of four lay sprawled on the floor, their faces forever frozen in terror. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. She radioed in for backup, her voice strained. As she moved through the house, a guttural sound echoed from the hallway. She spun around, her flashlight beam dancing wildly. A figure stood at the end of the corridor, backlit by a faint glow from the streetlight outside. It was a clown, but unlike any Sarah had ever seen. Its face was smeared with grotesque makeup, the smile painted on in jagged strokes. Their eyes gleamed with madness. "Police!" Sarah shouted, her voice shaking. "Hands where I can see them." The clown didn't move. Instead, it let out a low, haunting laugh that seemed to reverberate through the walls. With trembling hands, Sarah unholstered her gun. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she stood her ground. She edged forward, her flashlight fixed on the clown's menacing form. The clown's laughter grew louder, filling the air with a malevolent energy. Suddenly, it lunged at her, arms outstretched like a predator closing in on its prey. Sarah squeezed the trigger, the shot reverberating through the house. The clown staggered, a pained grunt escaping its painted lips. It crumpled to the floor, limbs splayed in an unnatural angle. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she approached the fallen figure. What she saw made her blood run cold. Underneath the clown's twisted exterior was a man, his face contorted in agony. His eyes locked onto Sarah's, a haunting mix of desperation and despair. "Please," he rasped, blood oozing from his lips. "Help me." Sarah's heart pounded. She called for an ambulance, her hands shaking as she pressed a cloth against the man's wound. In that moment, the terror that had gripped her transformed into a surge of compassion. As the paramedics arrived, Sarah watched them rush the wounded man away, his pained eyes still locked onto hers. She knew she had just witnessed something beyond comprehension, a darkness lurking beneath the surface. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't shake the memory of those eyes. She delved into the investigation, determined to uncover the truth behind the nightmarish scene. What she discovered would change her forever. The man, once a loving father and husband, had been driven to madness by a tragic loss. The clown persona was a desperate attempt to escape the pain that had consumed him. Sarah realized that sometimes, the monsters aren't always who they seem to be. They can be born from tragedy and loss, their true faces hidden behind layers of despair. And in the face of that darkness, it was compassion and understanding that could bring light back into the world. The Shadowed Sentinel. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a feeble light through the gnarled branches of the ancient forest. Emily stood alone, her breath visible in the frigid air. She had ventured too far from the path, and now the woods seemed unfamiliar. Every tree a twisted sentinel, every rustle a sinister wisp. As the night grew darker, a sense of foreboding settled upon her. She quickened her pace, twigs snapping beneath her boots, the echo reverberating through the trees like a sinister warning. The shadows grew deeper, and the once familiar forest seemed to transform into a malevolent labyrinth. Suddenly, a rustling to her left made Emily's heart leap. She froze, her eyes scanning the inky blackness. There, amid the twisted trees, stood a dark figure, barely distinguishable from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, a macabre silhouette against the night. Fear clutched at Emily's throat. She turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. But the forest seemed to shift and morph around her, closing in like a suffocating shroud. The wind howled, carrying with it the haunting whispers of the trees. Every time Emily stole a glance over her shoulder, the figure loomed closer, its presence suffocating. It seemed to glide through the underbrush, effortlessly gaining ground. Panic surged through her veins, urging her to push harder. To escape this nightmare, branches clawed at her, leaves crunched beneath her feet, and the relentless pursuit of the dark figure seemed endless. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her vision blurred by tears and terror. She knew she couldn't keep this pace forever. Desperation gripped her, and she veered off the path, hoping to find some respite among the dense foliage. She crouched behind a gnarled tree, her heart pounding in her ears. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to make a move. Minutes stretched into eternity, and then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic footfalls approaching. The figure was near. Emily clamped her hand over her mouth, trying to stifle her erratic breathing. Her eyes darted around, searching for any sign of salvation. In the distance, a faint glimmer caught her eye. It was a feeble light, barely visible through the tangled underbrush. With renewed hope, she crawled toward it, her body aching and trembling. As Emily neared the light, she realized it was a small clearing, illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. In the center stood an ancient, weathered stone. Covered in moss and lichen, it seemed to radiate an inexplicable sense of safety. Emily huddled behind the stone, her heart still thundering. She prayed for morning to come quickly, to banish the night and the sinister figure that haunted her every step. Hours passed, the forest seemingly holding its breath, waiting. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon, the figure receded into the shadows, disappearing like a phantom. Emily waited, trembling and exhausted, until the forest finally released its grip on her, with trembling limbs. She made her way back to the path, vowing never to venture into the woods alone again. To this day, she can't shake the memory of the dark, eerie figure and the chilling night in the haunted forest. The shadows continue to call to her, a constant reminder of the terror that lurks in the heart of the wilderness.